Welcome back to episode 30 of The Thinking Ape. Today I have a special guest, Associate Professor Dr. Andrew Cambell. Andrew is a registered psychologist who has been researching and teaching in digital mental health, cyberpsychology, and child, adolescent, and family mental health for over 20 years. He's the chair of Australia's first formal Cyberpsychology Research Group and is the inaugural Australasian Editor of the Journal of Cyberpsychology, Behaviour and Social Networking, and speaks regularly throughout media and community events about consumer technology's impact on health and well-being. His areas of interest include cyberpsychology, digital health, VR, video games, social networks, smartphones, and wearables. Thank you for finding the time to come on the podcast. The first thing hopefully that was all right.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
First thing I probably want to ask is what is cyberpsychology? Because I had to have a quick Google to get the actual definition of that.
Look, it's not uncommon for people to ask what is cyberpsychology. Basically, it's human-computer interaction. So how human beings are affected by the way they use technology, and particularly the internet. So it's been around for about 30 years, but formally has only been identified as a new discipline of multidisciplinary areas led by psychology. As you can imagine, when the internet came on, we saw the world change. And we now want to understand, after nearly, 25 years of being connected to the internet, a quarter of a century, what's changed. And so cyberpsychologists look particularly at human beings as individuals, but cyberpsychology includes sociologists, economists, marketing, media, you name it. It's political, it's life, it's how we now interact. So cyberpsychology studies specifically the goods and the bads without bias and reports on it.
I want to get into that because I really want to know about the impacts of social media and things like that. But I want to know as well first, how'd you fall into this kind of space? Because it seems like a niche space to me, just someone hearing about it, even though it's kind of all around us. But yeah, how did you fall into this?
Pretty straightforward story, actually, nothing to I'm a psychologist by trade, so I trained as a psychologist, and my background was working with children and adolescents. I briefly took some time out from my studies and went to the United States in 1998. And while at New York University, I was seeing that the internet was starting to be used for online therapy, so online counseling, basically. At that time, the area of cyberpsychology didn't exist, but we suddenly realized that online environments, such as virtual worlds and chat, text messaging, you name it, could actually be easier ways to access people with mental health problems to get them the help that they need. So I became interested in how to bring that back to Australia. They were starting to pioneer it in America. In Australia, though, as you're probably well aware, and your listeners might be aware, we've got a really bad internet system. Our broadband's pretty poor.
I was worried this internet was going to cut out because it's raining outside.
So I think currently, in 2022, we're ranked somewhere around past 60 for broadband speed in the world. I think Romania's ahead of us, Chile's ahead of us. We're not doing very well in regards to our infrastructure. So you can imagine in 1998, coming back and saying, hey, I want to do online therapies, wasn't well received because our internet just wasn't up to snuff. So I was fortunate enough to start an academic career and did my PhD in the areas of online counseling, and was fortunate enough to be one of the first Australians to publish on how to do it. And from there on, I've just pushed the agenda of let's start getting the internet involved with our therapies and reaching out. And of course, the biggest thing that started the whole sector, at least in Australia, was a thing called e-mental health, where we had professors like Professor Helen Christensen at Black Dog Institute do things like Mood Gym, which is a program to help people with depression. And slowly, bits and pieces of psychology came into computer science. And slowly but surely, the area got recognised. In 2017, Sydney University granted me permission to start Australia's first Cyberpsychology Research Group, and here we are.
Very interesting. Can I ask what would be the differences between psychology in person and e-psychology? Like for me, in terms of I've done podcasts in person and I like prefer in person a lot better, but in just terms of convenience and things like that, like online is just way more convenient. I can reach out to more people. I don't need to organize times and things like that, make people more inconvenience out of their day. But in person, I feel like I can read people more. It just seems a lot more human. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So how does, because psychology would obviously like untucking, like people would be emotional and things like that. So how is the difference online compared to in person? And are there like techniques?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The simplest way to answer it is that nothing will replace interpersonal interaction in the same room because of visual cues. Even auditory cues are slightly different online to what they are face to face, and sometimes that's just simply broadband lag or volume, sound, whatever. Having said that, there's also the sense of proximity of safety. When you're in a room with somebody, you sense whether you're safe or not. When you're online, you don't always know. There could be somebody eavesdropping on the conversation. There could be recordings of what you're doing. So there's all those issues. Having said that, what we've found is that the majority of people are very open to being online for counseling, therapies, and all sorts of things. One, because of convenience and ease, no different to media and podcasting in that sense, but also because of cost. You know, to travel to a psychology appointment, or if you're in rural and remote Australia, you may not even have that luxury. It could be, you know, go to the nearest capital city to get help. People don't have the time, the money, or the inclination to do it, but if they can hop online for a Skype session or a Zoom session, they're willing to do it for particular issues, not all issues. Having said that, we're now moving into the metaverse, you know, actually having avatars that are interacting with therapists. So you don't have to show who you are. And anonymity has been the strongest thing about online therapies and cyber psychology, is that if people can be their authentic self, but they can still have a level of anonymity, then some therapy might get through. We've seen this quite a lot with different age groups, particularly the younger age groups. So I think both worlds have great benefits. You know, one doesn't replace the other. Having said that, we're seeing a very, very strong move to online therapies now as opposed to face-to-face.
Are therapists trained any differently if they are going to do online? Like, is there a course or something you can optionally do or be forced to do, or that kind of area? Because I know I was going to say I go to UTS, but I graduated this year, so I went to UTS.
Oh, well done.
And I know that they do online therapy, and I'm pretty sure they either use like psychology graduates or psychologists, and I'm pretty sure there's no differentiation. I think it was a COVID thing or something like that just stayed on.
It's a very poignant question you ask, and very timely. I can't go into too much detail about, is there a training course, because you never know, there might be one that will crop up very soon. Having said that, look, psychologists were forced online, as all allied health and medical practitioners in general were forced online during COVID. Was there training? No, there was no real training. There was some very rudimentary guidelines about, here's how you help somebody online if they're in distress. The irony was, if they're really in distress, get them face-to-face as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So, in the sense of how to work with specific disorders in mental health online, no, there is no specific training program at the moment. But as I intimated, that might change soon.
Yeah.
Having said that, psychologists are very unique in regards to adapting technologies probably more readily than other allied health services, with the exception of GPs and nurses who've done some excellent telemedicine over the last 10 years. But looking at like occupational therapists, speech pathologists, although they've done great telemedicine as well, telehealth, there is no one way to train somebody to use all the technology, particularly if the other person on the other end is having technical problems. So it's reliant on the client and the clinician to both have a level of skills that's technically competent and work in a clinical setting online that maintains privacy and data collection as well, because as you can imagine, what we're doing right now on a podcast, that's data and it's out there forever. So that sort of information, no. And that's actually international. There's no one standard for that yet. But we are very likely to see those changes come in place.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you is Zoom used as well? Like what kind of platform is used for those kinds of instances?
Look, if we did a very quick sort of historical rundown of when did online therapy start, as in just chat, for example, ICQ back in the 90s was
no idea what that is.
Yeah, so ICQ was a asynchronous relay chat. It was basically the first kind of direct messaging, but it was very clunky. After that, then we sort of moved to very basic web video, but it wasn't streaming. It was just little video recordings. And then we saw Skype sort of come on board. To be honest, Skype is being overtaken by Zoom now. FaceTime has been used for quite some time and all those things. But as I mentioned, we've found that these environments don't often make people all that more comfortable. In fact, most people want the camera off. So what we're seeing is forums and chat rooms, and now VR chat is becoming the more staple space that people are doing therapies in.
You touched on the metaverse as well. Could you explain that and then explain how cyber psychology ties into that? Because the metaverse is something that confuses me. So like, I have no idea.
So believe it or not, the metaverse is nothing new. It's going to be a new realm for a lot of people to access, but the metaverse actually has kind of existed in little pockets around the internet for quite some time. The most well-known one is a thing called Second Life. And Linden Labs was a company, or is a company, that created that, again, late 90s. And it was a kind of a social experiment to have avatars talk to each other in a virtual world. But you didn't engage through virtual reality. You actually just engaged through your computer screen.
Like a computer game kind of thing?
Well, it's what we call a sandbox, which means that there's no real beginning or end. It's just a virtual world with items you can move around in it and avatars that can talk to each other. The game side of it is, if you create a game, great. If you don't, it's literally just a social meeting space.
Yeah, okay.
So the metaverse really is a massive extension of that. However, if you could imagine this, it will be everything you do offline, you will be able to do online in some form of physicality, or I should say digital physicality. So you will have an avatar of yourself, and that person can go and shop in eBay in virtual reality, and then go and find your folks and say, hey, look what I've bought, and sit down around a virtual campfire and look at the items you bought. See it as an extension of your existing world into a digital world with actual better graphics than what the internet currently has.
How do you actually, that scares the shit out of me. Just how do you enter that?
So at the moment, the metaverse is all designed through VR. So it's all virtual reality.
So you'd wear a headset kind of thing.
Or wear a headset.
Okay.
However, the VR world is moving at a pace that is remarkable. To put it for your listeners in very simple terms, the internet was developed in 1969. It didn't get switched on worldwide until 1995. So that's a very long time between concept to delivery of a global technology. VR was sort of developed again in the 1980s, really had a good start in the 90s, but it was too expensive, too clunky, and needed more bandwidth and power. So it kind of dropped off for a while there. Social media picked up and took over. And then slightly in the early 2010s, VR got cheaper, more accessible. But now VR is almost getting to a point where it's going to be superseded by augmented reality, which can be done on your phone. So you might remember about 5 years ago, Pokemon Go.
Yeah, I remember.
The first augmented reality game. And now we're moving to a thing called mixed reality. And that's where, for example, for your listeners may not be able to see this, but you're wearing glasses. It means your glasses could actually be interacting with the metaverse, the internet, your phone, and this broadcast all in one go while you're talking to me in a regular room. So you'll actually be doing many different things at once just through your eyes, looking at things and blinking, and even the sound of your voice interacting with the metaverse.
How long till this is like a kind of a common use reality, not something that's millions of dollars?
A great question. Look, there's a very simple, you could say, mathematical equation that we use for the rollout of technology. And that is that if something is adopted for a period of about 5 years, it seemed to be stable in the tech industry. So for example, when Facebook came around in 2004, MySpace was before that, but the truth is that MySpace was very, very clunky. Facebook came up, it seemed to be an easy, low broadband or low bandwidth tool. It was almost viral in its uptake. 5 years later in 2009, it's a multi-billion-dollar company. Others were trying to crack that. It became a staple. Facebook is likely to never fall over, but we'll see different versions of it. Same with text messaging, same with mobile phones and smartphones. 5 years is basically, if you see it as a constant use of technology, it is here to stay. Yeah. VR headsets are now just pushing the 5-year mark. So we're about to see VR to be a very mainstream thing. I would actually predict it to be mainstream within 2 years, and that we're actually going to have augmented reality glasses probably on our heads easily within 5 more after that.
Wow. Okay. The I have a friend who he has a VR headset. He it would have been like 3 years ago now, or 2 years ago. He just got it like as a joke, and then he just like used it once, showed us all. I think we played a game or something, and then he just tossed it like aside in his room, and he hasn't looked at it since. So like,
that's a really good point. One of the reasons why VR has stopped and started is actually the content, not so much the immersion.
Yeah, I can imagine if there's nothing going on.
That's right. If you're not seeing it evolve as fast as the internet evolved in content and usability, then the headset's a waste of time. But we're starting to see that happen, and COVID accelerated it. Moving into our homes for long periods of time, virtual holidays got taken up, virtual social events got taken up. So we're really seeing a fast adaptation of the technology, and on an economic level, the investment in the sector is remarkable. It's 4 to 5 times more than Hollywood makes in a year. It's put into VR now.
Okay, interesting. Well, what I want to ask is, I guess, tying into psychology, is what's the impacts of this on people, I guess? Because like you said, cyberpsychology is the interaction between people and technology. And what my like gut tells me, which is just what my gut tells me, it's like the more I'm on screens, the more shit I feel. Yeah, you know what I mean? So what's your like opinion on that in your work?
A very popular question that most, not just cyberpsychs, but psychologists in general are asked all the time, is there a peak screen time? And particularly the government's talked for years about 2 hours of screen time is all people should have. To answer your question succinctly, screens aren't the only thing that make you feel bad, but yes, they do. It's actually being in the one position the whole time. So it's ergonomic as much as it is mental and cognitive that's draining you, being engaged online on a screen. So is there a peak time? No. The government recommends 2 hours. And that actually comes from a study, or I won't even say study, it was more of a theory from 1955 when TV first came out. And parents were worried, how long should a child watch the television for? And 2 hours became the magic number. But to this day, myself and many other experts around the world have yet to find a document that says this is how we found 2 hours to be the optimal screen time. Truth of the matter is that you can't get away from screens now. No. It's not sitting at your PC, it's your phone, or it's games, or it could be a bulletin board. It doesn't matter where you are, you're around a screen of some sorts, because that's how we interact with information. The real problem is the content. What are you doing with that screen? Now, if you were binging Netflix for 8 hours, you might feel tired, but you could feel really happy and relaxed because you just watched the best series that you binged for 8 hours.
Yeah, okay.
But if you're working, geez, you're going to be drained. And certainly our Zoom contact has shown that we don't naturally interact on Zoom like we do face-to-face. And that's because if we look away from the screen or we act differently physically, that might be misconstrued in the Zoom conversation. So this is why we're seeing a lot more fatigue, or Zoom fatigue as we call it.
That's interesting. What about in terms of your eyes? Because isn't staring at screens a long time bad for your vision?
It can be. What we've found really, and there's pretty good science on this one, is that it's the wavelengths coming off the screen of light that can interfere with brain activity. So definitely acuity, as in, how you focus on the screen is important, but if you use your font sized adjustments, that's not too bad. However, long periods of time in front of a blue light, which is the backlight that lights up screens, can really interfere with your sleep. And that one's been known about for quite some time. And this is why actually medically they recommend no screens before bedtime, at least an hour before bedtime.
Yeah, okay. I've just like the past 2 weeks, I've started reading before bed, and I've just noticed my sleep is way better.
Yeah.
Way better. It's because of that.
Yeah, screens are the biggest interference to circadian rhythms and setting up your brain to really prepare itself to go to sleep, because it actually delays. It pretends it's sunlight and it delays your circadian rhythm to have its onset.
Can I ask about social media as well?
Sure.
Do you have I don't want to drift too far from your areas of expertise, but I would like your opinion on it.
Yeah.
I just find myself addicted. Like I don't have Instagram on. I will delete all social media on my phone for like a week, then I just re-download it again in a weak moment, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or I keep Facebook off. It's more Instagram.
Yeah.
I don't have. I just have Instagram and Facebook, but I don't know.
So look, social media is a big part of cyberpsychology research, and I've spent 12 years in the social media realm of understanding the goods and the bads about it.
Perfect.
To answer your question really succinctly again, is social media bad? Again, it's what you're using it for. And is it addictive? And that's the one that we talk about the most in media. Social media has addictive qualities. So can it be addictive? Yes, it definitely can be addictive. But if you're aware of why it's addictive, if you actually understand how it works, then you're able to have that sort of conversation with yourself. Well, how do I mediate this? So there's kind of levels of social media use that lead to levels of addiction. And the biggest one is if you're an influencer, or if you're a person that's running a group, or you have to be connected for work because media is your job. In that instance, the reactions to what you're putting out is a huge dopamine hit in your brain, which makes you feel good, or possibly outraged, because if it's lots of trolling comments, you have a visceral response to want to get back into the argument and defend yourself. But it's an endless cycle, whether it's positive or negative. You just want to constantly be in it.
Yeah, okay.
If you switch it off, you probably found yourself, after you've uninstalled it, there's sort of like this void. Like you feel like, what should I be doing?
Yeah, to me, it's just mindless scrolling.
Yeah.
Like in just spare. If I actually consciously think about it, it's like I'll be doing something, and then like in 5 minutes past, and I'll just look for 2 seconds.
Well, that's a seeking behavior. That's slightly different from the two interactions. From scrolling, which is procrastination or time wasting, however you want to look at it, it's to do with the fact that your brain's wanting something to enjoy. It literally is like being in a great lolly store and trying to find the right sugar hit that you want.
Yeah, okay. I'm a snacker as well, so
that's what I mean. It's your brain is looking to snack on content.
Yeah, okay.
Everyone scrolls, but more often than not, when you see when they're scrolling, or they are aware of when they're scrolling, it's at times of, well, I got to fill some time. If you're scrolling when you know you should be doing something else, then it's
like working.
Yeah. If you're scrolling when you're with somebody, then that's really bad. That's a big indication of you've got some social issues now, because you'd rather be engaged with content that you don't know you're going to get than be involved with somebody social.
Yeah, so, okay. I've been there. There's been times. Definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, those are the indicators psychologists pick up on and go, all right, now that we know you're doing that, there's usually an issue underneath that. So the social media addiction, or the social media habituation, we also call, which is not where you're going to have a bad health reaction if you stop it, but you may notice that mental health wise, something else is going on with you, and you've been using social media as a filler to avoid dealing with the mental health problem.
Interesting. Can I ask, did you, there was like some rat on my study about I think it was cocaine or something. And then when they gave them like a fulfilled life with lots of stuff, they didn't use the drugs. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I do.
And then when they just kept the drugs, they just kept eating until they OD'd,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Well,
I guess that's a good example.
Yeah, so those are learning models, which shows that, if you have more choices in your life that are equally rewarding, you're likely to either balance out or extinguish the really bad ones. And we've seen that back before I was doing cyber psychology. I was in drug and alcohol. And we saw that when we worked with people that needed to go through rehabilitation, it was missing really important parts of their life that gave them the rewards that they'd always been seeking. And once they got them and developed those relationships and stabilities, the interest in drugs and alcohol went away. So yeah, we do believe there's some connection there.
Okay, so in my instance, generally speaking, I'd like to be off Instagram. It's more when, like, to be honest, when I'm working, especially when I'm working from home, it's just like, just scrolling when I'm like in between things, that kind of thing. That's my main thing I want to get rid of. And I even noticed pain in this thumb today, which isn't good.
Yeah, look, it sounds to me like you've built in a habit.
Oh, definitely.
And that habit is doing something for you that something else isn't.
Yeah,
so
okay. Work must be boring.
Yeah, well, it's either that or literally you're thinking, I need to do something. And at the moment, the easiest thing to do is Instagram.
That's true too.
We've got to look at what it is you should be doing, want to do, and then look at the questions of what's stopping you from doing it, because Instagram is just a distraction.
Yeah, that's true. Well, okay, where is it beneficial other than reconnecting, or is that its main angle?
Yeah, so definitely connecting, and there's no question about it. So if we look at the COVID studies just over the last 2 years, the amount of people relying on social media to still be involved in people's lives that they couldn't even go and visit, even if it was down the road, if we're during lockdown, that ability to see very simple things like enjoying a party or sending a message, having jokes, that social connectedness of here's little bit anecdotes of my day was so important for people to feel like they were still part of a community. But on a much bigger level, we found that social media has a massive positive impact to mental health if the right content is used and if it's used by the right people, because not everybody will use it appropriately.
So what's the right content and what's the right people will naturally be my next question.
Yeah, so the right content, for example, is around what enhances your life. It's not looking at what supplants your life. So if you're using social media because you want to be like somebody else who's on social media, that's a supplantation. You're trying to model yourself on something that is a fallacy in a way, because we all curate content. What you see is often not authentic. But if you're using it to really connect with someone and have conversation under the photos or under the videos themselves, and you really feel like, this is a big part of my day, and set aside a portion of your day to do that, then it becomes an activity just like exercise, sleep, diet, and so on. What we've found is that the biggest influence that positive social media has is on life changes. So people that help you to change, to get through challenges, that's a really good thing. But when they're doing things to sell product or to look good or make you feel envious and jealous, that's a negative thing.
But do you really think that, like, if I wanted to change my life or change a certain aspect, wouldn't that change come from people around me?
Absolutely.
Like having those conversations as opposed to seeing a 2-minute video? Like
Absolutely.
that might, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And this is where we talk about social media as an overlap to your actual offline life.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's not a case of you don't have friends, you don't have family, I'll turn to social media, it makes it okay.
Yeah, it'll fill the void kind of thing.
That's right. It's a case of you're already thinking these things, and the people in your life you perhaps have already talked to. So then you're getting other perspectives from a wider social network. And that's usually through Instagram or TikTok or those sorts of things. And it's sort of, you're seeking that content that you're already wanting to seek, but you're not quite sure what it's going to give you. So you're trying all these different influences.
Do you think as well that because it gives you what you like, people can like get pigeonholed and then they just think the same thoughts, think everyone agrees with them, and then you can't really hear the opinions of others or XYZ?
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head there. And that's kind of the dark side of where we could go as well. If we talk about fake news and conspiracy theories, QAnon and so on, you find those congregated groups that, you know, if you're not part of this group, you're not like me. And if you try to attack my group, I'll attack back. If we look at it in the sense of people trying to explore to make themselves better, one of the differences we see between the two groups, those who are very, very focused in on one thing and those who are exploring to be better, is the ones who explore to be better have a wide, very diverse interest group across many subjects. So if they're trying to make themselves better physically, you find that they also go into content that makes themselves feel better emotionally. A person who feels like they want to connect with people exactly like them tends to only find those groups and not look at any other perspective.
Yeah, okay. Is there a way to counter that, I guess? Because it's all
wow.
like, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
like, I feel like it's the algorithm, I don't want to say that because I don't know, but it shows you what
Yeah,
you
it
like.
guides you.
So,
Yeah, similar content.
yeah.
That's kind of the billion-dollar question. If we can circumvent negative and polarizing social media messages and groups, then we may be able to have real discourse with those that are perhaps doing harm to themselves and to society. What we found is that the only way, and I liken it very similarly to those with severe addiction behaviors, so severe drug addicts, severe alcoholics, is that they have to want to help themselves to begin with. So you coming in and saying, this is bad for you, let me show you alternatives. More often than not, they get defensive, thinking you're trying to make me do what you want, you're not listening to what I want. So we have to have these conversations where if you want them to come out, they need to know that you're worried about them, and then give them a choice to come out. And that's really hard for a lot of people. And we've seen this over 20 years of studies with those with extremist groups. We've seen it in studies to do with false narratives, such as QAnon. I've mentioned that one already, but we've seen it with Al-Qaeda, we've seen it with terrorism, we've seen it with even Ponzi schemes about financial wealth. It's very hard to bring these people out because they truly buy into the narrative and to the group culture. And so we liken it to traditional psychology studies on cultism. And we've never been able to break people from cults unless they want to come out themselves.
Yeah, okay. So would you say a downside then is, I guess it could make more people with that personality type susceptible for those kinds of things?
Yeah, and that's a really good way to look at it, is that there is a personality type that is attracted to that. But if we move away from trait personality, which is kind of a born inbred sort of tendencies towards gravitational of other personalities like themselves, and we look at what it is that they're wanting to achieve, you know, what it is that they get from this. It's not just that they're like-minded, but they're wanting something from it. And what you find when people that come out of cults in general, or they come out of these fake news groups or extremist groups, is they wanted a meaningful connection. They all say the same thing. They wanted something that was a deep, meaningful connection. And when they don't get it, or they realize they were manipulated while trying to get it, they actually then come out feeling even more disenfranchised than when they went in. They start wondering who to trust and how to trust themselves. And that's a really hard journey to take them on. Generally,
that kind of subgroup of people, what's the best approach after that? Where I can just imagine you feeling even shitter because you're like, oh, I was like, I bought into crap.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you know, we've seen this now. If you see any of the footage of the Jan 6 insurrectionists that have gone, you know what, I don't know what I was doing. And we're talking about the ones that were genuine, the ones that have said, you know what, my life was pretty bad. I thought this would change my life. It didn't, it made it worse. And I feel like an idiot. They've come out, and the first thing that they're probably trying to get help for is to understand what they can trust their own thoughts on. So getting them to trust themselves again, that's the journey that psychologists take with them. And we kind of go back to, when did it all start that you were second guessing yourself, or when did you start second guessing others? And more often than not, I hate to say it, sounds almost very Freudian when I say this, it's right back to childhood. It's really something that happened in childhood. Or if it was in more recent times, it was a devastating thing that happened in their lives. Could be divorce, it could be the loss of a loved one, loss of a child, could be financial ruin. But there's usually a catalyst that's so catastrophic that has made them into who they became, to only then realize that that wasn't going to solve them, that the problem that they'd already been through. And now they've got two problems to solve: the one that was the trigger, and the initial resolution they thought they'd get from these groups.
Okay. Can I ask as well, with like Instagram, social media, all that stuff, are you saying the best balance, like you've got to be really conscious of how you're using these kinds of things?
Yes.
Because I feel like there's always, like on Instagram, there's always just like models everywhere, things like that.
Exactly.
That like bikini chicks, things like that, or guys that are jacked, like equivalent. Like there's always just like, what's the word I'm thinking of? Like luring for easy kind of just scrolling stuff, as opposed to being so conscious. And how can you expect people to be so conscious all the time with something that's right next to you? Like people always have their phones on them. All mine's here.
Yeah. Look, again, it's one of those things that I can honestly tell you is a big problem in psychology in general, because the biggest influenced population is young people. Under 25s make up the largest group of people that are unfortunately correlated with mental health problems, and they would almost say in every case, and social media hasn't helped. It's either made them feel bad about themselves, made them envious, made them jealous, made them bullies, been victims of bullying. So they think, well, how do I get away from it? The thing we talk about as psychologists, not as a cyber psychologist, just psychology in general, is what were you looking for to begin with? Now, with children, they don't know, they're just exposed. So that's a really hard group to try and protect. And the only way we can protect them is through better education in the education system and better education of their parents early on. But more often people get their phone, they get social media, they dive in, it's too late. So then that group, and that could be extended up to 35, age 35 now, is the group that's gone, what am I seeking? What am I getting from this? And the truth is that when you look at the amount of bikini babes or jacked guys online, it's cookie cutter. They're all the same. Sure, there's different attractive levels, but what is it that the influencer is trying to achieve? And I can tell you now that we know as psychologists that they have an insecurity themselves. And that insecurity is more often than not a case of, I want to be desirable, I need reinforcement, I'm not having meaningful relationships, so I turn to the internet to create this channel to do this. So it's symbiotic. They're getting people following them going, I wish I was like you. And the irony is that ones that are supposedly the idolized ones are saying, I want something more. I want my viewers to give it to me, but I'm not getting it. So I'll just keep posting.
I'm gonna sound old, but like I'm 24. So like I'm so glad. I see like my little cousins and they're on their phones all the time, on games all the time. And I remember growing up with little toys and dinosaurs and playing with that stuff. And I'm so glad in my like formative years, I guess, that I didn't have, like, I didn't get Facebook and stuff like that till year 12.
And that's
like,
probably
I was like a late bloomer with that kind of stuff.
The biggest issue about social media is if we look at its existence and its impact, its real massive impact, it really started around 2006. So when Facebook really proliferated into our lives, we've now had just on 15, 16 years of it. In that 15, 16 years, if you were a child born in that time, the likelihood that it seeped in and your parents didn't know its impact was very, very high, because they were still catching up with what's new in technology and how it would work. We're now moving into another generation in the next 15, 16 years where the metaverse is going to be the focus. Social media is actually losing its gloss in some ways. We use it now like we used text messaging. It's just there and we use it as a tool. And you can ignore it if you want, as long as you didn't buy into it early in your life. The main thing we need to do now is what you're already seeing in the news headlines is regulations around social media. Truths, fact verification, predatorial behavior, and making sure that we've got moderation, really looking that whatever is being promoted out there has some verification behind it. Facebook's moved away from a lot of what they used to do. That doesn't mean to say that they're doing it better or worse. They've just moved away from their initial model of anything goes. Instagram's come up as more of a visual tool rather than a dialogue tool. And so, funnily enough, still run by Facebook, but they see that as a young person's platform. When you look at the dynamic of Instagram, demographic of Instagram, really the upper age set's about 40. So now it's a case of, if it's a younger tool, what's a meaningful social media platform? And the irony, and something that would have been so unpopular to say even 5 years ago, is that places like LinkedIn now and Twitter are becoming far more useful to many different ages. And Facebook's become unpopular with the young set and popular with the old set.
I've noticed generally, I feel like Facebook's become a bit unpopular with people that I know. Definitely. And I don't even think of LinkedIn as social media, but I guess it kind of is, because I have LinkedIn too, I guess.
It's a very corporate base, and it's a very communication base about activities and investment opportunities and so on. Having said that, LinkedIn is still not popular in mainstream. It's very much corporate. But you're starting to see the emergence of various types of social media for various needs and wants. And Instagram was kind of a one size fits all, but even it's tapping out in its resources now, with Reels being a popular thing, but people thinking, I don't want to have to reel for 30 seconds and then watch the next reel and watch the next reel. But they don't want to go to YouTube and do a long clip. So you'll see some moderation come around how we engage with social media. And to be honest, it's probably going to be again through the metaverse.
Is there any science or any backing that you're aware of that shows the impacts on attention spans? With constant satisfaction, and there's always the next kind of thing.
We've found with younger people, the attention and satisfaction is much, much higher with the use of social media than it is with older people. The reason being is actually a very simple cognitive fact that we knew long before the internet came about and changed society. And that is that as we grow older, our interests and time resources are limited. So as you move into your working career, you get married, or you have a partner and you have financial responsibilities, or you have children and financial responsibilities, your time resources and your attention to what needs to be done actually becoming really limited. So if you look at social media use for those online in, say, age 40 to 45, on average, it's about 2 to 3 hours a week, compared to a 29-year-old where it's 6 hours a week. When we look at younger than 29, it could be up to 30 hours a week. And that sounds ridiculous, but it does get into those numbers. Correlate that to what are they doing in their lives, what are their financial responsibilities, and what are their interests. Broader when you're younger, more narrow when you're in middle age. And then when you get to older age, 60, 65 plus, we're seeing it to be incredibly specific, that they're only using it for 2 or 3 things: family, finances, and current affairs. And occasionally entertainment, but very little time scrolling.
But because the older people didn't grow up in their formative years with it, do you think as in 50 years, whenever the younger people become the older generation, that time, that 5 hours a day will remain?
No, and the reason why is actually not because they grew up with it and they're used to it. It's because the advent of social media is going to become not a novelty factor. If anything, the way we consume information is going to change. One of the things we've learned, and this is something that a lot of people have been sort of speculating about, VR headsets and Metaverse and so on, is would phones go? And the answer is probably not. Just the same as that when we got personal computers on our desks and there was laptops, they thought laptops would take over. No, they didn't. So what we're going to find is lots of different tools for accessing technology, and it'll be based on user preferences. And that's really the way I see the future, is that this generation who grew up with social media is probably going to see it as a regular tool. It probably won't increase too much in their hours. If anything, it'll decrease because of time and resources available to them. But they are going to get cognitively very narrow about what are they going to use it for. Because one thing young people have shown over just 10 years of social media use is that it does clutter their lives and they start getting more specific to what they want. The best example of a study of that is the amount of friends somebody has when they first start a social media account to when they have it 10 years on. And it reduces from hundreds down to under 100. And then as you get older, it gets even smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
So we find privacy kicks in a lot more.
Can I touch on quickly as well? What's the cyber psychology, I guess, view on the impacts of video games? Just to change course a bit, because I would never really been into video games, so I'm not like, it's not something I know much of, but I have an Xbox. I bought it during COVID, and I haven't opened it since COVID finished. But yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah, I don't know why my brain just doesn't go for that. It just goes.
It's not everybody's cup of tea. Okay, so video game research has been around for decades, and before cyber psychology sort of came around and sort of adopted a lot of the research, it was done actually by computer scientists, and it was done by developmental psychologists very separately as well, I might add. So the short answer is, what is the biggest impact? The biggest impact we've found is that it creates a tremendous amount of community growth. And you might think that's a surprising answer, because you think games might lead to violence. That's been in the news. Or games create aggression towards friends and family because you don't get off them, you're addicted to games and all of that. All of that also exists to a degree. But what we've found is that gaming is a spectrum of positive and negative. The positives being that those who are gaming now are doing it more for social reasons than anything else. They like the competitive factor, they like the interest of the topic of the game, but once they play the game, they want to engage with others with the game. And then we find that gaming communities are actually extending out into friendship communities, support communities, and other interests in different topics of games.
That's funny. Sorry. I was just going to say, I played because I play online with my friends and we'd all play. And when I tried playing by myself and I just didn't like it.
Yeah.
And then when COVID lockdown finished, I could just see my friends, so I didn't need to play it. So
point in case. That's it in a nutshell. What we found with the aggression side of things is that there has been over 25 years of study of video games, whether it be online games or offline games, just palm games to first-person shooter games in video arcades of the 80s, is that they do not lead to violence, but we find aggression can go up with certain types of games. The aggression levels that go up for certain type of games only last at most 5 minutes. So the connection between games and violence is not really there. And the connection between games and aggression is there, but not at the severe levels that we thought. So games in general, particularly after many years of psychological study with children's and child's development, now have been concluded to be relatively pretty good, depending on how they're managed from a parental level. And that's been the letdown, is that parents don't know much about the games, the game topic, the content, and also the ability to actually be involved in certain things in gaming worlds that could be bad behavior, such as gambling. So there is loot boxes, which is how you get items in games. And sometimes you have to pay for them, and sometimes you're gambling for them. So that's been a real problem inside gaming. And then there's also cyberbullying inside gaming as well. So there's actually other aspects. If you see it as its own world, there's many aspects that need to be carved out in it rather than just the game itself.
Yeah, okay. Do you think that it's mainly for young people, that kind of stuff? Like if older people played games, those kind of risks aren't as prevalent?
You're absolutely right. We haven't seen any studies to say that, say, over 18s are having gambling issues inside games, but we have seen them have a lot of social issues and time wasting issues that have affected their jobs or their life at home. The younger ones have had, unfortunately, more of a financial hit, but they've also had more of an addictive hit, because more often than not, we find that they are using games to supplant something else. Perhaps they're not having the friendships they want offline. Perhaps their life at home is quite difficult, and games are the escapism that they want.
I was going to ask that tied in well, because the whole like offline friendships and things like that. Do you think that, because I can see a scenario where if people spend so much time on screens and they forget or they lose the skill of interacting in person?
Yeah. We have seen it as a developmental issue, and more often than not, we can see it comorbid. In other words, it exists with other conditions that the child may experience. Autism's been probably the highest correlation in that sense because of the social deficit. They're not very good socially, so they seek for it online. Social anxiety would be the next one. Depression is often tied into anxiety of different types. And then we've seen it, unfortunately, in the saddest of cases with child abuse, where the online world is their escape from a very abusive environment. So more often than not, when I've seen children in my practice over many years, one of the things I first go looking for is one of those things I just mentioned.
Yeah, okay. Is that, so you'd say usually like the social media or the video game isn't the cause of the issue, it's a symptom of it?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay. So the World Health Organization a few years ago announced that gaming disorders are a real thing. I was quite annoyed at the time because I got to go on ABC TV and sort of make a rebuttal to it from an Australian perspective, because the science is not there to say gaming disorder is its own thing. The science is there and it says gaming disorder is a manifestation of trying to deal with a problem. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important, particularly anybody listening to this, they understand that gaming by itself is not the issue, it's the tip of the iceberg. Mm-hmm. What's under the tip is what we need to get to. And it's more often than not a mental health or behavioral and social issue.
That I always thought all the social media and things like that were causes of problems, but it's interesting to view it as a symptom of something.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to ask as well is, like, where does AI kind of tie into all this? Bit broad, but
wow, big one. Big one. Okay, so cyberpsychology is only scratching the surface on AI. The reason why is actually two factors. Number one, it's evolving so rapidly, we can't keep up with science right now on how it's affecting behavior. Mm-hmm. One area we've looked at is chatbots. How are chatbots interacting with people and helping them in life, or actually creating more problems? So natural language processing, which is where computers simulate human conversation, is something we're very, very interested in. On the other side, the second thing we look at is there a limit to AI? And the biggest moral, ethical dilemma is consciousness and sentience of AI. In other words, the AI believes it's its own identity, its own person. Cyberpsychology can't even get its head around that, because we don't believe an AI system could ever ask the question, am I real? It will only do what it's programmed to do and learn from certain observations. So to answer your question on what happens with AI next, this is the first time I can honestly say we have no idea. We have none whatsoever. It is such a new area that we think right now AI needs to be very specifically targeted for certain things and certain things only, that it should not be a broad use tool. And that's because we don't understand how it does its own learning to the levels of complex thinking. But we do understand how it can benefit in assisted learning, such as teaching someone languages, mathematics, solving problems, giving GPS directions, all those things. That kind of AI is fine. But the helping humans with mental health problems, no, we're not there yet.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a good point to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thank you for the time, Andrew. Appreciate it. It was very insightful. The social media stuff, I always thought it was, I said it before, the problem, not a symptom. So I got to think about that.
Yeah.
Because for example, I have a friend who's always playing video games, and I'm like, I wonder what's going on with him then. you know?
There's going to be other things going on there, but the video games is their world. That's their safe space. They can control it. They can engage with it, they can enjoy it.
They can go in and out when they want as well, I guess.
In and out, but you take it away, and then you'll start seeing there's other issues. It's very much a layer upon layer issue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for the time.
Pleasure.
I appreciate it.
No worries.